maybe I can ask a few panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and then we can get started with the presentations. Stephen, is that okay with you?
Yes, I don't see any other faces except yours. What do I do here?
Just enlarge maybe or is it the speaker mode? Maybe you're on speaker mode. Or otherwise enlarge the icon. Or maybe you see people as they start speaking.
Okay, that's fine.
Nathaniel, so great to see you.
Hi, good to
How
see
are
you. Very well, thank you. Good to see you.
Hi, Nathaniel.
Hi, Stephen.
Thank you for joining this.
It's my pleasure. I so enjoyed it last year.
Great. No, you're the star reviewer.
No, hardly. Great to see you.
Nathaniel, do you want to say just a few words to the residents and all our guests about yourself very briefly, and we'll go around the table like that?
Sure. I can't see anyone else, but there may be, that's okay. I can see you. And I guess when you show presentations, it will come on your screen. Is that right?
You should see it on your screen, everybody. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So yes, hi, everybody. So looking forward to seeing the presentations today. Such a wonderful subject. Sublimity is so important in art and in life. I'm a filmmaker. With great, deep connection to architecture. I made a film called My Architect, which some of you may have seen, about my father, Louis Kahn, but have certainly been involved in many other films, but also in architecture, in various ways through the years. But it's just great to participate in these incredibly important juries and panels, and I'm just very excited to see all your presentations today. So I hope I can have maybe bring a little bit of a different perspective from outside the architecture world to your projects today. So I look forward to it very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nathaniel. Leah Kelly.
Hi, I'm Leah Kelly. I'm a neuroscientist who collaborates a lot with architects, and I've been involved with T-Space for about 3 years now, and I've enjoyed seeing the students' projects that develop over the residency, and I'm looking forward to contributing today and hearing also others' contributions.
Thank you, Leah. Anthony Titus.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Anthony Titus. I'm a painter and architect educator and huge supporter and fan of all of the important work that T-Space does. So I'm very happy to be here today.
Thank you, Anthony. Kate, we have Kate McConnery on our panel as well. Kate, if you'd like to unmute and briefly introduce yourself.
I think I've done that. Sorry, I'm on my phone and I think this will work. Can you see? No.
We can hear you perfect.
Oh, you can. Oh, perfect. Thank you. I'm on my phone and I was just having an issue with my camera. I'm so thrilled and excited to hear the presentations today and just had such meaningful conversations with everyone last week. I am a great supporter and admirer of all the work and programs and offerings at T-Space, and really honored to be here today and looking forward to it. So thank you so much for including me.
Thank you, Kate. And Jose Araguez.
Yeah, hi everybody. It's great to see so many familiar faces. Thank you for having me again. I am an architect and a writer, and I work between Paris and New York, although I'm about to transfer or move my European base to Madrid next week. And I'm looking forward to seeing the work one more year. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Jose. We have at least 8, if not more, former residents on the panel, and I just want to extend a very, very warm welcome And so you should feel free to join the discussion as it develops, without spending the time to call out everybody who is here. But I would like to get us started right away, if that's okay with everybody. And we can start with Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex. Should I also briefly introduce myself as well?
Yes, of course.
Hi, I'm Alex. I am in my third year at Harvard GSD, pursuing Master of Architecture. Previous to that, I had an architecture undergrad degree from the Bartlett in UK. Right now, I'm in Italy. So I guess 6 hours ahead of you. Cool. Let me start sharing my screen. Please feel free to stop me if I rumble too much or if the presentation goes way too long. So my topic is called Sunstone, and it is named after the poem of Sunstone by Octavio Paz. And I was specifically inspired by this line from his poem, Sunstone, where he talked about how there is a sort of moonrise, what I understand is as an alternative to the modernity, right? By tracing the ancient light that is yet to be born, all the dream and forgetfulness of, say, nature. And here I would like to start with this piece of architecture called Palazzo Castiglione in Milan. The reason why I really like it is this sort of archaeology altitude towards archiving the nature, which is a representation of the sublime, because it is essentially incomprehensible. Similarly, you see what the Peruvian called huacas, which is a sign of wisdom over the incomprehensibility of nature. And they were trying to showcase, the man-made wisdom by carving smooth surface out of the roughness of, caves and mountains and stuff like that. And here, this is my sort of interpretation of sublimity, which is the contrast between the rationality of our logic versus the incomprehensibility of nature, right? So the way I was sort of trying to do it is to not essentially to interact with nature, but then is to sort of archive it, right? So this is the site, which is located in the Upper Hudson Valley, and I was very, inspired by the geological sublime of this location in specific, where different striation of rock forms together. Sorry, I'm hearing my echoes. And I started by just imprinting stone with different materials. So this is paper pulp, where I was sort of like archiving let's say the index of nature by using wet paper to lay on it, and you see the texture of stone. And here I use a different sort of material on a different kind of rock to create this sort of like transferred texture of the roughness of nature. Here I was very inspired by the let's say the natural crudeness of the weathers in Hudson Valley, right? The intense snowstorm in the winter, and I would like to use that material to sort of create a smooth surface out of literally organizing and shoving snow into a smooth surface, and then you cast use different materials on top to create this sort of like smooth surface out of the site, which is, rough and in presence of rock formation. And here I started with this model where well, this is summertime, so there's no snow for me. So I sort of use wood as a representation of, let's say, snow. And I used casting to create this sort of like contrast between the smooth and the roughness. And here, I think the space is quite intriguing because you have this interplay between the rationality and the incomprehensibility of, say the Grotto-ish experience. And I then started to create a series of spaces with different theme. So this work here in particular is about transparency, where I also experimented with different materials, such as resin, where you give this kind of like degree of transparency under the reflection of light to imitate the stone being transferred into light. And you see the space is quite intimate here, which is my another comment on the sublimity, which is not necessarily something vast and gigantic, right? It could be intimate in the same time. Here, I was just sketching out a sequence of spaces from intimate to vast, to from dark to bright, and I thought Bathhouse is a perfect program for it. And here, I sort of articulated a series of experience from entering the cave, and then going into changing room, which is dark, and then you see a cold pool, and then a hot pool, and then in the end you enter a tidal pool. And here, the organization of space was very much inspired by just finding random rocks presented on site. Where here, if you imagine you have a bucket and you threw different bunch of stone in it, and then you see this type of organization, which is, I would say, highly Gothic. And then you see how those rocks are sort of like positioned on the site. And then this is my attempt to rationalize, the relationship between different rocks, right? How you see a different kind of like almost Gothic or Baroque sort of formation of circulation in between, where you see the entrance, receptions, the changing room, the shower, cold pool, hot bath, walkway into the tidal pool, and then the section of it. So here I already introduced the entrance, the shower space. This is the hot bath, where it is sort of like a twin of a spherical rock, which I thought this is like a sort of, I don't know, a Grotto version of Pantheon, almost like, where in the case where there's water flooded into the space is quite sublime, in a sense where water is sort of reflecting the texture of the rock. The cold pool is sort of facing the glazing, which has this sort of like rock texture. And here is the walkway into the tidal pool. And this is the final sort of like section that I had here, showing the cold pool, the tidal pool, and part of the plan where the section cuts. I think that's everything. Hopefully that's anything clear. Thank you.
Very nice, Alex. No, we did not specify that anyone would have a program in this questions of the sublime. So that's something that Alex decided, and we said fine. But when I go back to your whole presentation, I go to one sentence: stone being transferred into light. That's my favorite sentence of your presentation. And I think that, yeah, how this gets at the sublime. And I hope in the next presentation we get a little bit more on the site, because you didn't really show the site plan. Do you have that? Could you just show the site plan on the Hudson River, like the overall?
Yes, we can share the screen and share a few photos also. Roxana, you can go ahead and do that from our, just the site plan drawing, perhaps.
I could also
Okay.
try to get out from the internet. Let's see.
I mean, the site is facing west across the Hudson River, and you can actually see Olana, the Frederick Church's house, the famous Hudson Valley School painter. You can see it from the site. So, Irini, I think we should have that introduction to, so all the critics
Yes,
can
and we
understand.
have the, agreed, and we have the brief on in the chat as well, but I think it's best to share it on the screen for everybody.
Right. My apology. I should have introduced the site, which I completely forgot. Right. Okay. Let's see. Right here, we have some site data here. Right. Okay. So this is the site plan. It's right next. The site is a waterfront, basically, positioned on the east coast of the Hudson River, and the site is sort of like facing west north. And here the parcel, it is sort of defined as a 100 by 200 feet square. Yeah, and it has sort of like connection to the road here, and railroad system passing through as well on the back. And I think there's some photos. Yep. Cool. Am I missing anything about the site? Yeah. Okay.
This is helpful, and we've also Roxana just put on the chat the slides as well in case someone wants to revisit it.
Cool.
So would that be facing west? That image on the screen now?
Yes.
Would that be?
This is
I think
facing.
that's what I miss. What I miss is a deeper connection to the site. I mean, I think it's a great project, but I think you get a little bit away from connecting to that reflective light on the Hudson River. I mean, if your idea is stone being transferred into light, the amazing power of that setting sun on the Hudson River across that big expanse, yeah, maybe that could be reflected a little bit somehow in your presentation.
Definitely. Cool.
Yeah, maybe a couple of thoughts, Shiotan. Very beautiful project, right? I mean, there's some interior images that are really evocative, right? And I think show your sensibility about the phenomenology of the space, but interior space primarily. There was this one sketch where what you call the irrational and the rational, this line drawing sketch you had, which I think what was nice about it was that they were both seamlessly connected in a way, right? The irrational part and the rational part. are basically the same line drawing, right? And I mean, I wish that had been translated into the final project, because actually what we see at the end is that there's a kind of Cartesian template which frames the position of those kind of operations, those digging operations, and then the language and the spaces you obtain out of it are of a different language, right, of a different nature relative to that Cartesian template, right? So I think what's missing there is that seamless connection between those two languages, or even completely shedding the kind of framework you have underneath, and then kind of just going out of the digging operations potentially. Second quick thought, I'm really interested in this notion of the sublime and sublimity, and I'm really curious to see how the conversation is going to develop around that. At least in the Western philosophical tradition, the sublime has to do with fear, as a matter of fact. It's not so much about beauty. It's basically about, when you sort of watch lightning or are standing on the edge of a cliff or something, and that makes you aware of how small you are in the face of this natural wonder, right? And that kind of causes a certain degree of fear. I think maybe if you had somehow connected with the vastness of the river more, or kind of make your inhabitant aware of just how small one is with respect to that scale, or even potentially the fear of flooding, like something of that sort, I think could have potentially maybe connected this more to the idea of the sublime along those lines. But otherwise, beautiful project.
Thank you for the comment. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely more stuff to think about site-wise. I did thought about this, contrast between the beauty and the terror, let's say. And my interpretation is sort of like nature is horrifying because of its incomprehensibility. Therefore, we're sort of archiving it and sort of like framing it, right? Just how, a little hut sort of like frames the storm and keeps you safe, right? I think for me, it is this sort of like the Cartesian framing of a certain sort of like natural elements that's sort of like distancing us from feeling the terror, and I don't know, transcends that into a feeling of sublime, I guess.
You raised such an interesting sort of question right in the beginning for me with your project, because first of all, I really like the project very much. I agree about the sort of interaction with the site, that feels like you're trying to create both the site and the response to it. And what it made me think of was that this question of, and I love the way you said it's the contrast, the contrast between the rough and the smooth, the contrast between the rational and the irrational, contrast between nature and human beings. I think you can't, it may, I don't know, it's an open question for me. You raised the question, which I find really interesting, is can we create both sides of that and still create a sublime experience? And I don't know. It seems like an open question to me that your project sort of opens for me inside myself. And I love thinking about this because I'm not sure you can. I think the idea of creating something architectural, an architectural response to a place in some way that alters your experience of the place and that maybe allows you to experience what is sublime about it, or create a sublime interaction between the things. I think you might need the contrast of the natural and then your sort of response to it, or your interaction or your intervention within it. And I think that's something really, really key in that about architecture in general, because I sort of feel a lot of times architects too many times try to, we do it in many arts, not just architecture, but we try to create the thing and the response to the thing. It's like unfair, right? In a way, it's trying to have your cake and eat it too. So in a sense, I guess what I would say is, if the site had this kind of rock formation in it, and then out of that you carved this thing, and the site naturally had the roughness, you hadn't created the roughness, and then you created the smoothness, as the example you first gave from, was it where was the first example of the smoothness in the stone? Was that in Peru, did you say?
Yes, yes, the
Yeah.
walk.
Yeah, and I immediately got what you were saying, and that sublime moment is that the roughness is natural in the stone, and then the carve is the human being. So there's something in that resonance between what is there and what you've done that I think one kind of has to have to make it actually be sublime. Maybe I'm asking you as a question more.
Excellent, Nathaniel, you're right on. I was trying to find a way to criticize. I mean, I like the project very much too, but
Yeah,
this image and the word question of the sublime work so well together. And
yes,
I even made a note. I'm writing notes on what I'm trying to understand here. But this Peruvian nature man-made, it is sublime, something sublime, So as is Machu Picchu, for example. I mean, if you look at it, it's an incredible juxtaposition of orthogonal stepping elements of architecture with this enormous mountain. So Machu Picchu, the image of Machu Picchu that you even just the cliche image you pull up, if you Google it and you get it on the screen, it's very sublime in this mysterious way. So I agree with you. It's something he's getting close, but then it's too contrived somehow. And this is not. This is. I also think that there's a certain image of the materials when he was talking about the smooth and the rough. Could you go to that collection of material images, Alex? The smooth and the rough. What? Stop there. Where you have, this paper, and the very smooth and the rough frame right there in the lower right-hand corner. Those 4 pieces or 3 pieces of paper. Maybe there would be a way to make this thing like that, molded, something molded, so that the actual materiality had this dialectic in it, smoothness and roughness, instead of just drawing it like you're carving it out of some black, already given material. That would have been another way to develop it. But it's a great project. I mean, it's 3 weeks, it's great. Anthony, what do you think?
It's a brilliant project. It really came a long way since the midterm. And the only thing I would add, I think it is if the procession to the intervention, I think is incredibly important because in a sense, the payoff seems to be, as you pointed out earlier, the westward expanse and the kind of changing light in the horizon. So if you look at the photographs that you presented, which were very beautiful, the one, that one that gives the horizontal view outward, that's the kind of release. So when you enter the structure, there's a kind of compressive quality. You called it intimacy. So I would think the compression of the interior and then the release of the Hudson. But the third component, I think, is the lead up to that. In other words, the procession outside of your intervention, because that's going to, in other words, I think for the project to be incredibly successful in the way that you want it to be, what you see or experience inside has to only be possible inside. In other words, when you leave the project and you go back out into the larger site, whatever you perceived inside of there, you shouldn't be able to perceive outside of it. I think that, and I think you've gotten close. So if you had another 2 or 3 weeks and you could study the site more carefully, I think you would really fine tune it. It's a really beautiful project.
This one image is very much about compression too. So I'm wondering how much compression until you get to that point of sublimity. And so both vertical and horizontal, you're tilting the axis. That in addition to the question about intimacy together, it's an interesting pursuit, yes.
Can I just say that for me, I think I love the material studies and the models, but there's a kind of disconnect between the pictures from the models and then the experience he would have sort of walking around the different pools or whatever, and it would be, I feel like I would like to see a more visual progression from these types of images to connect to the experience you would have of all the different spaces on the site and within the site. That's all. At the moment, there seems to be a disconnect for me. So that's where I would encourage you to go to try and these images are very beautiful, but they seem very abstract and not connected to the plan that you showed in any way. But it's also a great project.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's one of the challenge that I have to face is to connect the drawing with the model.
That would take another
Yeah.
couple of weeks, you know, another work on it for another 3 weeks. Then you can have a real project. For me, I take 6 months to do a design, you know, so, you know, you just started. A good start.
Very good, Alex. Thank you. We can continue the conversation with Abdullah. Abdullah, are
Thank
you
you.
ready to share? Thank you,
Abdullah,
Alex.
Yeah, I'll just share my screen. Okay, so hi, my name is Abdullah and I'm an architect from Pakistan. I hope you can hear me fine, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I've titled my presentation as The Duration of the Sublime. I would like to start with this description that I wrote for my project, which says that the project tries to explore the idea of sublimity as an absence of an ever-changing presence. In this juxtaposition, the cosmological elements of color, light, shadow, and water interact with architecture to create a sublime spatial encounter. This experience is of a continuous journey curated with transitions, which achieves a gradual change and slowly reveals itself to the eye of the observer. These are fragmented spatial studies which allow us to situate sublime, to marvel at the temporality of morning fog, or to make us ponder what lies on the elsewhere of clouds. The composition quietly frames these temporal moments and asks for stillness in the hazy Hudson Valley landscape. The space softens itself to heighten the diffused atmospherics of the space. In a world shaped by immediate gratification, the sublime here becomes an act of slow satisfaction, of lingering, looking, and becoming. So I tried to approach this idea of sublime as something absent, something inconceivable. I tried to record different sort of absences that I felt. For example, the dust kind of levitating in the thin air and almost negligible or absent, or something almost blurred, something almost you can't tell the outline of, like the haziness or fog, often which is an occurrence at the Hudson Valley. And I tried to experiment it with model and drawings. So I was actually using my models and drawings to sort of as devices to sort of understand what sublime might mean to me. And to develop this idea further, I experimented with this first model, which tries to capture light and shadow in a specific way, which is also sort of detached from one another and creates this sort of void in between. But there's also this sort of continuity of the shadow, which moves with that plane. And also, I'm thinking of these surfaces as not planar, but something which is more tilted and kind of creates that duration in the sublime or elongates the experience. Just looking at the idea of compression and moving through something. And I started to give it more depth and volume, and also started to look at the idea of color. Color as something which is dissolving, arriving, and not just an immediate encounter. This is the composition, how it looks from the top, and another view of the interior. So while looking into the idea of color, I started to experiment with different ways I can manipulate color through refraction or reflection and start to experiment with different openings or different gradients of color, sort of an interior model space. And to also, while digging deep into this discourse of color and sky and sunlight, I also was looking at this idea of how actually color is created in the sky. So it's basically the sun position, which kind of moves below a horizon level to create these different civil twilight, nautical twilight, and astronomical twilight. And it also depends on the particles in a specific area or a specific season, which causes these different sort of colors. These are some of the paintings that I've like cropped out to sort of create this loop of color changing throughout the day. And these are from Hudson River School of Paintings, which is the location of a site. And I was also kind of relating this color diagram to our own biological and psychological rhythm, which is called circadian rhythm, and all living organisms follow this. So that's how we represent that rhythm also through these colors of the day. To kind of orient ourselves to the site, this is how this site is. And this is where you access the site. This is the Hudson River. North is at the top, so you're facing roughly the west. This is just a very rough diagram where I was trying to study how these planes can sort of tilt and capture different colors of the sky, different light at different times. So I was just trying to study here how I can tilt those up from certain angles and orient them to the side. These are just some sort of mossing developments of, or trying to study get the right proportions to create an experience of sublime. I was also looking at this idea of using water as an element that weaves the mosses together and also brings a natural element into the project and connects it with the site. So these, you can see the water channels passing through the site, and it also creates this very shallow sunken body which kind of collects the water, and these can also be collected with these slits. I'm sorry, can you still hear me? Or is there a lot of background noise?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, that's good. So I was just trying to color this shadow and different times of the day, how the shadow can be sort of received by these mosses. So I was thinking of these mosses as sort of receivers of light also. So this is kind of the plan drawing that I did for the project. And you can see this volume right there, which sort of has this dissolving color. And these two mosses connected with this water channel. I'll show these model images of this diagram of this plan so you can understand this visual better. This is just an overview. And sort of looking at this shallow pool as also reflection or mirror of the sky color or even the trees that are present on the site. So just looking at these planes as receivers of these different colors of the light, and I was trying to understand where to tilt these up and how to actually achieve that effect. So look, while working on the idea of negative space also, and something that is absent, and as how this says, one must imagine what one is denied. So looking at that in section, there's this feeling of absence also, but also this feeling of these planes receiving shadow and receiving light. I was looking at this idea of also an approach that is sort of funneled, or you're compressed into this space and then revealed. Then there's this revelation of even sky or other elements. If you can see this sort of leading line. So I was also looking at these angles that you will be sort of revealed. They will act as sort of hurdles to maybe block your view at certain times and then slowly reveal the view. And this is another section through the side. On the right, you can see the Hudson River. On the left is the Conrail Road, and this is how the section is cut. So now I'll be showing a slideshow of a few moments that I wanted to convey through model. So this is just a change of light. This is when the sun is towards the east, and this is when the sun is towards the west. On the right side, we have the Hudson River. So just trying to capture the haziness and fog of the Hudson Valley. This is the sort of water I was thinking of, the channel, and this is the pathway with the colored west wall. I was also thinking of these masses as not something that emit color, but also maybe receive this color of the sunset. And this is when the sun is towards the east. This is now, we are looking from the river towards the project. And this is where you approach the project. So I'd like to end here. Night is sublime, day is beautiful. Temperaments that possess a feeling for the sublime are drawn gradually by the quiet stillness of the summer evening, and which sort of tries to explain this day and night shift, and that becoming an act of sublime which moves you and not only charms you. Thanks.
Fantastic project. You know, my favorite moments are the idea of color as something which is dissolving, and then your comparison to the circadian rhythm diagram, and then making that comparison to the Hudson River School painters, but just selecting a kind of dissolving color from their work. So I just you know, you said in the beginning the sublime is something absent, and there's something that connects to this notion of color as dissolving. And for me, that really gets to the question of sublime. And I'm not sure whether the geometric solution is correct at the end, whether it needs to be so expressive. But I think it's a great project.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yes, Abdullah, I agree. I feel that you've come a long way from the midterm. I agree with Stephen about the color analogies you make, and I think as you were moving through the presentation, there were you created some really sublime moments. Maybe you want to go back to these images, but kind of the juxtaposition of the structures, yeah, and the light. There's something going on here that I can't quite explain, and I think that's the feature that kind of causes the feeling of the sublime. I think, yeah, you've really progressed this far. Commend.
Thank you so much.
I too really like this project, and I think it's so interesting to look at the project we saw just before in this project, because the project before sort of was looking at sublimity being found through contrast, and in your project you're sort of, it feels like you're looking for sublimity in some kind of relationship to time also. This idea that that the sublime is kind of in nature, in the fog, in the colors, in this landscape of the Hudson Valley. And how can you use architecture to help us experience that? And so I felt that what you were doing in a way, I think of this as being like slow down architecture. This is architecture that forces you to, or that encourages you to sort of stop, slow down, to experience temporally this landscape. It messes with your circadian rhythm in a way, like if you're in the fast rhythm, this is something you encounter that slows you down, that somehow makes you aware that you're a human being in this landscape, and where, is there something sublime going on there, whether it's fog or the changing light or whatever it is. So I guess the question for me was just like, well, what forms? It could be this, it could be something else. And I think you've you've introduced the question, the wonderful question of what forms would help us do that. And I almost wonder if the forms could be less heavy, less. Kind of like you think about the Hudson River School, one of the wonderful things about those paintings is the frame. Like there's this frame around the thing, and there's lots going on beyond the frame, but the frame is choosing just this one particular thing. Sometimes it's landscapes of church, it's very wide, it's a huge, vast thing. It's all kind of in focus. In some other Hudson River painters, it will be more misty and mysterious, but there is a frame. So I think what you're doing with this, in a way, it feels to me, I of course, you're looking for surfaces that will be affected by color and those things, but you're also really creating some kind of frame. So I guess I don't have any answers. I'm not an architect, but it feels to me that the frame needs to be thought about a little bit, and maybe the forms could be less, could even be less, because what you're trying to get at somehow is this not maybe so much the interaction between the architecture and the landscape, but the interaction of the person and the landscape enabled by the architecture, that the architecture is somehow slowing you down to the degree that you can encounter this sublime thing that's kind of in nature. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but those were some thoughts that came from your wonderful project.
No, I think that was very helpful.
Great thoughts, Nathaniel. It made me think about, in a painting where I first really feel I could just stand there forever, and that is a painting by Goya called The Dog, that's in the Prado.
Sure.
It's from 1820, and it's just a painting of solid, just fading, dissolving color. And at the bottom of this gigantic canvas is a small head of a dog. It's like, I mean, it's in this permanent place where those Goya paintings are in the Prado. And I'm sure Jose knows this painting, but
I know the painting. Yeah, I think many of us do. It's a fantastic reference, because that's like just pure atmosphere, right? The air is like, it's right there with you, right?
For me, the questions of sublime, and your reference, made me think of that painting. And if anybody gets to be in Madrid, that is a must see, and I guarantee you will never forget it the rest of your life. It's just something, which is the question of sublime, and how he did that in 1820, way before the Hudson River School painters, or even before abstract. In a way, it's like Mark Rothko was there in 1820. I mean, certainly the work of Mark Rothko as a painter carries on this position of dissolving color. But I think that, I don't know, I just pulled it up.
It's really great. It also captures what Jose was saying about the sublime being terror, because the terror of the dog at the bottom of that
dog is scared,
is so powerful, scared to death of the sublime of this kind of atmosphere and this color. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, there was the image that you had up, Abdullah, just before you started going backwards, and the right side of it had the kind of reddish, soft, that image, the kind of softness of the form on the right, and the relative hardness and distinctiveness of the upper green form, that kind of play between the kind of haze. I mean, it's almost like a kind of dreamlike still life, or a dreamlike image, where you're kind of coming into a sort of, that blur between a waking state and a sleeping state. So I think, that kind of play between the soft ephemeral disappearance, that kind of light, or a light that is a kind of light on a harder surface. I mean, I think that's the kind of beautiful game that you're setting up. And I love the Goya reference as well. That's part of the Black series, correct?
Yeah, that's in that lower gallery in the Prado. It's a permanent collection of the Goya work, and there's all very figurative work. A lot of fear and tragedy around the walls. But then at one end of the gallery, there's this giant dog. I mean, the dog is tiny, but the painting itself. I mean, I've got an image of it here on my phone. I mean, you could just Google it on your phone and it comes right up. I mean, you can buy prints of it. It's a very famous painting.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah, what's beautiful about that dog, I think, in my opinion, is that it almost doesn't look like a dog, but
Right.
it looks enough like a dog that it's got this kind of uncanny resemblance. And I think maybe that also relates to your project, Abdullah, a little bit in that I think, in my opinion, what perhaps doesn't quite work is that you have too many sharp edges, If you want to work with the idea of the dissolution of color, then the fact that you have the discrete forms that I can immediately comprehend, right? Number 1, number 2, number 3, these are the sharp edges. That, in my opinion, undercuts the possibility of color really dissolving three-dimensionally across the atmospheres you're creating, right? So I think that's perhaps what's not quite there. And of course, it's 3 weeks, right? So, I mean, yeah, if you had another 3 weeks, you would have to experiment a little bit more to really achieve something like a certain undecidability of edges, right? Where basically, your horizon lines are not really that crisp, right? I mean, just walk around and then color really does disappear, right? Like it happens at sea, for example. So,
I'd also like to point, not that I have any authority on this, but I think what's interesting for me is that there is the presence of the sharp edges, and yet you still have the feeling of something dissolving. And I think that if there weren't the sharp edges, it might be a little bit too easy and obvious. And I'm quite enjoying actually the tension of the presence of the sharp edges, yet still feeling the dissolution. So I'm just tempering that criticism. But yeah, of course, there's part of me that agrees with Jose. So.
There's something to be said about the curved roofs as well, because they are attempting to dissolve something that you can play with shadows even further.
I just want to add, I mean, I love the lines of the building and your sensitivity to color and light and thinking about the color and light of the Hudson Valley, which, as you rightly note, the Hudson River School painters were thinking so much about. So I love the lines, and that I do feel like the sublime is, for me, the sublime is something that is at once beautiful and like wondrous, but also terrifying and something beyond us. Some people have defined it as the infinite, and something that's, you experience and feel it, but it's also unknowable. And so I feel like the shape of this is really puts you in this space of an experience of something that feels sublime. And I guess I'm just interested in, with this project, I think that the colors and the light and the atmosphere are constantly dynamic and changing, as you noted, across seasons and night and day. And I guess I'm just interested in, I have a couple quick questions. Do you see the colors as changing or having that kind of dynamic or changeability, that fluidity? But also, as far as one thing I'm confused about with the building, and I was having issues with my camera and sound early, so forgive me and I apologize, but the function of the structure is to tell me more about that, and if it is to create this experience of the land and the property and then being in it and framing it. I do love the way, as other people said, it slows it down. But what is the view out? And can you see out? Are you walking straight through? And I guess that may be tied to the wrap in of what the structure, is there a function for the structure that brings you into the landscape and that bridges the landscape with this structure?
Yeah. So I think about the function, I think it was more ambiguous, like the main program. But I think, yeah, my attempt was to kind of integrate the elements of sight with the project and somehow make it become a part of the context. Yeah, but the main sort of program or what happens within these spaces is still vague or sort of ambiguous right now, because I was just trying to create these moments of sublimity within this space. And oh, I think your first question was about color and if it changes. So I do think I was thinking about this idea of as some masses being receivers of color. For example, this red mass, I was also thinking maybe the red is not actually a color that is given, but the red is the color which is received by the sunset because this faces the west, the sunset. So yeah, so that was definitely a thought, but I don't think this is fully resolved right now. But yeah, there were some experiments to achieve that.
Right. In the beginning, when we were writing this, we had the requirement of Bryce Martin's paintings to be exhibited there. Bryce Martin Studios, not, and he passed away, last year. He was a friend of ours, and the idea that you would have, like, I don't know, 10 of his great paintings, but then Irini and I thought that would undermine questions of the sublime. You might even say that Bryce Martin had a certain way of the sublime, as does the artist James Turrell with his sky spaces. But we wanted to leave more creativity and therefore let the program not be part of the question of the sublime. And I think this could work definitely as a gallery. It could definitely be, that could be the program that would be introduced, or it could be a performance space, or it could be, so that's why we purposely left the program out. We said that what's specific is the site, and what's specific is the area. They're all about the same area, right, Irini? But we left the program out on purpose.
Well, it looks like it would be an extraordinary space to experience any and all of that in it. So.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, thank you, Abdullah. Moving on to Miranda. Thank you so much.
Who's next?
Miranda.
Oh, Miranda. Okay.
Are my slides advancing?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking time today. My name is Miranda. I am a sculptor, designer, and educator based in Kansas City, Missouri. And I'm really excited to share with you my project that I've been exploring and poking and prodding for the last few weeks called Approaching Thresholds. Very simply, in the beginning, I took a deeper dive with the word sublime, looking at its etymology and dividing it into sub and limen, sub meaning under and from below, while limen expressing this idea of a threshold or boundary. Limen is also very closely tied to our relationship with this idea of lintel. It is something that we experience every single day as our doorways, but this has really informed the expansion of my definition of the sublime as an action of passing through, within, or towards something that encompasses all of our attention. Very early, like Abdullah and Alex before me, I began working with these models and trying to see how the sublime could pertain to me, more specifically, dissecting them and collaging them together. And this maybe a preconception of the idea of the sublime as something that is fragmented. But really, what I learned from these is that the sublime is something that is at a distance. It is something that is an extension psychologically, physically from yourself. It is further away that maybe you can't see in whole, but in part. And then your imagination and your mind is kind of what fills in those gaps and allows you to wonder at what this space could be or what the landscape is. Another reference that I'll continue to use throughout my presentation is the Nocturne series by James McNeill Whistler, talking about paintings that you can stand in front of forever, I saw one of these at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago in 2011, and it has stuck with me ever since. And it is a series that Whistler painted on the shore of the Thames in the evening. It is ambiguous, it blends landscape and building, and it is something that is discovered over time. He revisited these paintings many, many times before they were finished, drawing from observation and also from memory. So the way that Whistler was perceiving the Thames shoreline is not very far off from the way of our site, the Hudson River, where we are seeing this kind of momentary or ephemeral view of the river at different times of day and different every day of the year. So when I'm thinking of the sublime, I'm kind of using this greater context of the threshold, but I'm looking at it specifically in 3 different ways. The physical, where you are in the building, you are either above or below the river. Chronometrically, in terms of time, at sunrise or sunset, the sun is moving below or above the building. And then elemental, the primary threshold here, which is the river and the shore. So very like taking advantage of the site, obviously placing my concept right there on the shoreline so the extent of the building can cantilever over into the river to create that extended site, that extended view into the landscape. And then looking at our section, which kind of provides this idea of light and shadow that we saw in my collages through a multi-level experience where one has to move through and within the shadows in order to approach the water above and below this cantilever. But beginning with the project, like Whistler, from across the river, looking back at the building itself, either at night or at sunrise, and the way that the building really begins to interact with the river, the reflectivity, the shadow beneath, the light structure at top. And then taking the same approach of section, also with plan, looking at the way that the shadows are forming thresholds that one must cross to approach the ultimate threshold that is the river. And then moving through the project, entering in, and this is kind of a view at sunset where you're confronted with the movement upward above, but also a shift to the right allows you to see the cantilever and where the lower floor of the building directly meets the shoreline. And then as you move upward above, you're met with the extent of the cantilever and able to see the water moving below. But back down again to where the edge of the building meets the water and the shadow of the cantilever. And then turning around, there is a moment where the left side of the building opens up to the sky with kind of an homage to the sunrise or the sunset, opening up to the above and below. And then in closing, just ending right where we began with kind of this reflection of the nocturne painting and the way that the building sits right at the horizon line and extends outward towards the viewer. I think the sublime is something that I feel like I've talked about or looked and researched for the last 3.5 weeks, but at the same time, it's something that is kind of slipped further and further away the closer you get. And so I'm excited to kind of dig into the details and questions of can form facilitate the sublime and kind of continue those questions. Thank you.
Miranda, could you go back about 5 slides to where you first get an image of your project on the river? There, stop. You were making your presentation. And by the way, as a teacher, this is my favorite project because you were so far from this and I was so nasty to you. But when I saw this come up on the screen, I said, wow, she really got it. You know, you went back to that painting Nocturne by Whistler, and you made this position of understanding the project in the reflection of the river water, but simplifying it completely. And in the way, out of all the projects, you know, you were given the toughest crit. I told you to start over, get rid of all those beams and all those, you know, whatever language, and you did. And it's really, really an amazing work because you pulled it off. And I'm actually blown away by it because I mean, you only had like a week or like 4 days or something to pull this together. You built a model in the last 3 days, right?
I did.
Incredible work.
Thank
Fantastic.
you. Not saying that I'm more skeptical of the Sublime for it.
No,
whole
I'm
time.
no one knows what the sublime is. That's the mystery. You know, I mean, that's why I keep referring to the James McNeill Whistler painting instead of to architecture. But I think we get closer because we're looking at it, just like the idea of dissolving color. I mean, I find, yeah, I find the real interest of your project is the fact that you actually came so far, almost like 360-degree turn. I mean, maybe you could show a couple of images that I really criticize with all those beams. Can you pull one of that up, just so anybody understands how bad I thought?
You can get to the Miro board, Mirador, your earlier PDF presentations, either way.
I think the working out a work of architecture is a process, and it's hard. You know, sometimes you can get the idea, but you don't have the geometry, you don't have the space. Sometimes you can get the geometry and the space, kind of, but you don't quite have the idea. I thought that's what happened with Abdullah. He got the geometry and the space and the dissolving color, but he made the idea come to life when he started, you know, plotting circadian rhythms and sun path diagrams. He anchored what was an impulse. So he got the idea after he got the space. You had the idea, but then you didn't have the space, and you had something else. But it's developed now, and I think it's a great project.
Yeah, Miranda, I completely agree. I think your early studies, your early collages had a quality that somehow disappeared when you started doing this kind of middle study. And you've reclaimed the quality of the collage and now put it into a model. And I think it's just a lesson for everyone to show that sometimes you need to go off on these tangents and it's okay to let go. And I think that the sublime, the understanding of the sublime does have this asymptotic quality in that you can get closer to something, but you never kind of reach, you know, complete understanding. And it's maybe that lack of fulfillment or the lack of resolve again is what creates the sense of the sublime in general. And I think that's what all the projects have up until now, is the kind of lack of complete resolution. So you're sort of in this cognitive limbo, which creates these feelings of awe. So yeah, well done. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, in complete agreement. And, you know, I think that it was a beautiful moment where you talked about the cantilever, because if I remember correctly, a couple of weeks ago during that review, the cantilever wasn't yet a part of the project, was it? Or maybe it was. I don't remember.
It was much more internal. So
Right.
where there was negative space in the building became positive space that would reach out over the river.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that the kind of clarifying of that and giving it, you know, a more essential presence has been really beautiful. And I love this image. I think that if you, the one on the right in particular, I mean, maybe it's too obvious to say, but you know, if you put that next to the Whistler image, you know, it's such a kind of beautiful, clear dialogue between the two. And the last thing I would say, you know, just to go back to your words, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the way you kind of dissected the sublime, you know, it's very important that you did that. And I think, again, just to go back to what was said earlier, sometimes, you know, you have an idea, but you don't have the body yet. And other times there's the body, but not the idea. And again, it's just a great lesson to be reminded of the fact that, you know, it's always a working process of editing and trying again. And, you know, it's just great to see where you got. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love this comment that brings up the cantilever, and it seems right on to me. And could you go back to the section? My favorite thing actually is this drawing. I think this drawing is so beautiful. I've never seen anything. I love the articulation between the different surfaces and everything. I just think it's a really terrific drawing. And the thing that I like about it especially is it seems to capture the major architectural idea, which is the cantilever. Putting aside the fact that it's way too thin for how long it is and all that, and you know, you'd have some structural questions here about how the heck you're going to do that. But putting all that aside, and of course I didn't know at the time what that gap was. I thought, oh, there's a part of the cantilever that's actually hovering in space. You know, of course, that's your hole that you look down into the water, which is so wonderful. But this drawing is really fantastic because to me, this is like finding the architectural idea to express what it is that you felt about the site. And it's the cantilever. There's some other things about things in your actual structure that I'm not even sure how much of that is necessary, you know, personally. My feeling is it's all about the cantilever. And I really got that from this drawing. I really love this drawing. I think it, you know, everything that we've been hearing today also is looking for some architectural idea breakthrough that expresses this feeling that one has on the site, you know, in interacting the sublimity of the river. And the cantilever is giving you that because you can be below it, as you've said, and you can be on it, which is you can be at the level of the river. It is allowing you to experience the level of the river and being above the river and looking down in the river, all of those things. And then perhaps even experiencing the fear of the edge, which is, as you say, the ultimate sort of, you know, threshold there is the threshold of falling in, you know, falling into the sublime, which is also terrifying. So all those things are expressed in this cantilever. And it's so wonderful to see like an architectural idea that actually expresses what you feel about the place and what you feel about what you're trying to do. So some of the other choices within the building and stuff, it seems like it could be this, it could be that. Maybe you see through, maybe you don't. You know, that's stuff you want to strip away. I think it's the cantilever that matters. Everything has to serve that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, Miranda, so I agree. I mean, as a work of architecture, I think it's a very fine project. You know, I think it's tactful and calm. But I think if you go back to, I think it was the next or forward to the next slide where you had this juxtaposition of this one, and you sort of further juxtapose the painting you had as reference above these two, right? Then I think you will realize that as an observer, I cannot really tell where one thing stops and the next one begins in the painting. I mean, that there's a kind of undecidability of outlines, right? Which prevents me from being able to say this is A, this is B, this is C. While in these images, what we perceive is in a way the exact opposite, right? So we see, you know, the completeness and the kind of totality of the project in its clarity stand out as a figure, right? And the cantilever, I think I agree with Nathaniel, right? I mean, that does part of the work. I think potentially there is some of your representations that could have maybe also suggest more of a sort of merging with the landscape and the water. Maybe I think that's what Abdullah, I think, did manage in one of his sort of close-ups, that even though his forms were discrete, yet the kind of point of view and optical effect created a kind of dissolution of edges, even though it wasn't real. So I think maybe some of that could have been incorporated into the representation of this, but otherwise it does stand for a kind of standalone, almost sculptural claim that cuts itself out into the landscape as distinct from the landscape, which is very different from what happens in the painting, right? So just to kind of make you aware of that, right? I think it would be a tremendous challenge to kind of see how you can dissolve these into the landscape literally, as opposed to figuratively or through representation, maybe within another 3 weeks. But yeah, otherwise, beautiful project.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the conversation. Moving on to Claire.
Hi, everyone. My name is Claire. I am a recent graduate from a Master's of Architecture program at Carnegie Mellon University. And I've titled my project Liquid Light. In my mind, the beginning to many thoughts on sublimity began with the artwork of Claude Lorraine, who in the 17th and 18th centuries began to paint landscapes with dreamlike longing and blurry qualities. And his artwork, rather than outlining every detail, required people to reflect on the inside and fill in the missing gaps to make it incredibly mesmerizing. Eventually, the Claude glass was made at the height of the picturesque movement, and the glass would obscure the environment, which pulled many into a trance of wonder. And the Hudson River, much like that of the Claude glass, reflects its surroundings while also distracting the environment from its own reality. So while also obscuring light, which pours a new dimension of curiosity into the landscape, in a way, it is as if the light which carves into the landscape rather than the water itself. So my question on the sublime became, can refractions or this obscured light begin to erode space rather than the water? So my study began by looking at how different water refractions occurred off of horizontal planes through different shaped glass. So in this example, the refraction occurs off of a corner of a relatively straight glass, while and this is a more zoomed in picture of some of those refractions, while more rounded glass created also these different interesting curved linear shapes. And then at the edges too, I began studying out to see what would happen when water would refract just at the edge as well. And so this made me think of how these two forms, just the straight element and the curved elements, could also reflect light onto vertical planes such as walls. So in this example, a straight wall shows the refractions of a curved water feature, while in this one, a curved wall refracts curved water features. And then in how this one, a curved wall refracts water, which is more straight or unobscured. And then from this study is where I began to see how that light and where it would gather could suggest the carving of space in a plan or in a section. So it was with these transformations that drove the overall site, which I'll come back to as well. So studying how the straight wall with the curved water began to kind of build in a specific area to kind of create a slippage moment, while a curved wall with the curved water kind of maybe suggested a carving of the ground plane where water kind of or the light kind of built towards the bottom of the wall. This is a GIF. And then lastly, how that curved wall with the straight water began to interact with each other and suggest other slippage moments as the water kind of built towards the outsides. So yes, again, attempting to combine all these studies is where I kind of landed, trying to connect the ground plane with the architecture of the form, as well as these refractions that would occur throughout different times of the day. So in this picture on the left would be like a sunset moment where the refractions are more apparent on the back side of the wall, whereas during the morning time, it would occur more like the right image in the morning time. And it was these ideas that kind of led to me to also consider like the uncertainty of the river's flood zone as an opportunity to produce this light and therefore carve out the space as well. And that is all I have prepared. Thank you.
Very, very great progress, Claire. I'm really excited that you changed. These were the two people I attacked was Miranda and Claire, and it's really right on what you're doing. You know, those. Could you go back to the diagrams of the curves? When you decide to make when you decide to make the project really based on these light refraction conditions, that's your breakthrough sketch, because it's completely different from what you were doing before. And it focuses on, can light erode space, water refractions? It focuses on that in a very simple way. And I think, you know, if you had another 3 weeks, you could make a real project out of it. But the main thing, and this is the thing about this studio, is sometimes you have to throw out everything and try another path into the question of the sublime, which is the focus. So I think in that way, the progress you made from the last time we talked is extraordinary. Good work.
Thank you.
Anthony, you saw the other scheme, right?
I absolutely did. This is such a moving. I'm so glad you landed on the sketch too, because I thought this was just an incredible moment. I mean, your question was so clear about refraction and space, and just to see you create those studies with such precision and clarity is really inspiring. You know, it's like it's almost like the beginning of a thesis. You know, you can take this question, and that's what I always love about attending the final and the mid reviews, is because when people finally get to the core of the question and you start to see these the drawings and the images and the words begin to match, and in a sense you don't really need to say anything. I mean, that's a great moment of achievement. A statement and a couple of key images, and it resonates. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Of course, I like it a lot because you're making movies with nature there on the wall. It's very exciting. And it made me think too about how wonderful it would be to encounter this. I mean, this feels on the edge of, you know, installation. It's sort of architecture and installation, and something that you might encounter at you know, at Storm King or something like that, except that there's no river there. So this is something very different, and you're really using the river to create your installation. I love these drawings too. They're really wonderful and evocative. It also made me think of how great it is, you know, how annoying it is to have a work of art that's the same every time you see it. Like, I think it's something that architects are always struggling with, because you go to see the building and there it is, and it's this icon and you check it off, you know, and there it is, and you've seen it. But there's nothing more wonderful than going to a work that is different every time you go. So this work is going to be that, not only because of the light and the time of day you went, but also, as you say, these flood conditions. And if you were really to engage those things in your structure and how the installation is built, where the glass is, where the concrete would be, where the water would slap up against it and such, all those things becomes really, really interesting. And so people who go to it would say, gee, you know, I saw it, when I saw it, it was sunset and the water was really high and the reflections were just amazing. And somebody else would go another time and say, you know, gee, for me, I didn't see anything.
Yeah.
And the other person would say, you got to go back, you know. So anyway, it feels like a very dynamic work that is going to, you have to, you know, the sublime is not something that you can schedule. It kind of happens or it doesn't.
Right.
And so this is something that engages the caprice of nature too. You might see the rainbow and you might miss it. And I love that about this.
Thank you. That means a lot. I think that I was definitely questioning the need to bring in the water onto the site or like how that would work. I think it's definitely a question that I would love to like explore more as well. But just like the overall arching idea that it could potentially happen, I think is exciting.
Definitely.
Yeah, I really liked what Anthony said about you not needing words to explain this project, because I think this may be the first project we see today where there's a connection, or rather, we don't see you designing something from scratch, so to speak, but actually we see that there's a link between the research models from before and then how that actually becomes the architectural intervention, right? Without there being a kind of leap in between or a kind of gap in between. So literally you could have just said nothing and we would have clearly understood what the project was about, right? Both in terms of its form, but also in terms of the phenomenology of the spaces you create inside. So I think that that's already, I think, quite an accomplishment for such a short program. And that's why I was also kind of shocked or surprised at least to hear that you had an earlier version, right? Because then it would be interesting to see how that fits into this otherwise pretty neat process, at least the way you presented it. I think in addition to that, the way it sits on the side is actually very intelligent in my opinion, because it kind of it sort of gestures towards the river by opening up to it. But at the same time, if I understand correctly, the enclosure is not open all the way. So basically you would kind of enter into that and would have certain glimpses out onto a river, but otherwise you're basically into this dim space with you know, other sources of light inside. So there's a kind of nuanced relationship to the water, which at the same time it's very specific inside. And then I think in addition to that, it's a type of space that, because it's not centralized, it allows you to orchestrate an itinerary around it or through it, right? Where you would go from, you know, experiencing something to then something else, whether that is a function or just a certain sensation or a certain atmosphere. So I think it's just very complete, I think, in achieving all of this. So I mean, I really commend you for, you know, for doing all of that. And it's not because I have a sweet spot for you, because you did do the introduction of my talk 10 days ago, but it's not for that reason. I mean, I really mean it. I think it's an amazing work.
Thank you.
From my perspective as a curator, I just think that it's a terribly exciting and terrific project, just for the sheer experience of it. And like a Claude Glass Mirror, I think I can imagine that the experience of it would change the way people think and see the river itself and the landscape, and it will create just such a meaningful, unique experience in that way to encounter that. And there's a dynamism to it. It's so related to place, and it's going to, like some of the other projects that I think the strength, slow us down and have us being in the space in time and place. And I think that's really just beautiful and completely unique. So I just want to give you my congratulations. It's really a fascinating project.
Thank you.
Claire, you really drew your way through. It's quite incredible to see. And we're moving on to Shreya, the last presentation for you for the day. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
You may want to go full screen. Yes. Okay, perfect.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shrey. I'm from New York City. This is 6 rooms and 7 rocks. So my project started when I visited Rhinebeck and I collected a series of rocks. And I'm exploring the poetics of how these rocks engage with surface and light and translate into architectural experience. My project is structured as a journey through 6 distinct rooms, each of them offering a unique narrative of sublime experience through the intersection of geological scale, sunlight, materiality, and time. So the characters of these 6 rooms are the sisters, the bend, the fall, the pinch, the lift, and the ghost. Number 1, the bend. A rock gets caught in a bundle of space-time. It intersects a conical manifold and forms a vertical light well. Room number 2, the ghost. A rock's presence is fractured by light. Number 3, the pinched space. A rock is caught in between the gravity fields of 2 trees, levitating gently above the ground. The rock intersects 2 curved surfaces, and a pinched space is formed. Number 4, the balance. Rock and wood touch in a precarious balance. Light passes overhead and sets in the crack between them. Number 5, the fall. The rock crashes through the roof. Number 6, the sisters. The sisters are binary asteroids caught in each other's orbit. They lift the edges of the room and frame the river and the horizon. Located along the river and running transverse to the sun path, light passes through the spaces between the 6 rooms, offering multiple entry points. This is just a series of sketches I went through, just considering this idea of multiple entry points into a fairly ambiguous structure. Yeah. And here are just final model photographs of how these rooms are sort of seemingly generic in form, but encapsulate an almost otherworldly experience. This is an overhead view of the pinched space room. This offers the juxtaposition of scale, I guess, between the architecture, the rock, and the human being. This illustrates entry or passageway across the rooms, and this is passage through an internal enfilade, connecting all of the rooms. The rooms just assemble themselves into a gentle curve that runs along the river. And because I really worked from the inside out with this project, I think that the question was really like, how do I encapsulate all of these experiences into one sort of structure? And I think that the sensibilities towards light, direction, and view in the landscape, I was able to kind of carry them through. as you see in this plan, where all of the rooms are just mapped out. Yeah, anyway, I think ultimately my project locates the sublime, not necessarily in the experience of looking outward and forward, but looking inward and reimagining something that can just fit in the palm of your hand. Great, thank you.
Trey, you always had such a clear beginning, you know, the idea of the 6 rocks that were actually collected in Rhinebeck. I thought that was always like, I mean, from day one, you had a concept, and still the strength, each one of those rooms, the strength is still there. Every one of those rooms, in a way, has a kind of sublimity. My favorite is the fall. Can you go to that image again? Just the relationship between light, which is coming horizontally, the fall, which is breaking through the roof, the sort of opening that's breaking through the roof, and an orthogonal frame. So everything there has a kind of one-to-one relationship to the idea of a rock, one of the 6 collected. But my problem with the project is then the overall somehow undermines that, because the long curve, and then also the sloping roof, and the kind of, I think that there's sublimity in each one of the rooms, but not somehow it's not in the overall. That's my feeling. Anthony, what do you think?
Well, I think, first of all, I love the project, and the room is the fundamental question, and I think what you said at the end about you work from the inside out, so that what we have in terms of the total form is probably just one possible iteration. I mean, I wonder, when I was looking at the aerial shot of the model where you see it as an object, I was wondering if the rooms should somehow maybe be embedded into the landscape. So maybe you don't even read or embedded into the site. So you don't necessarily read the object per se. And you'd have to almost enter and really just be inside of these spaces and moving from one to the other. So I don't even know if that's possible given the site conditions, but it seems to me that the internal condition is really the magic of the project. I mean, I think that's why you start, and that's why you remain there. So if you had another 2 weeks or 3 weeks, which of course you have, you could certainly work that. But I think the concept of the room and the story, each room is like a poem. I mean, it's really, really beautiful. And so I really respond to that for sure.
Yeah, I think Shrey, what's working in a really lovely way on the inside is true. It's perhaps not working at the level of the site operation, right? Because there's almost no site operation, right? I think there's basically a certain will to maintain the kind of unity of the whole composition as something that we can identify, right? In its curvilinear nature, in its finitude and everything. And I think sort of along the lines I'm building on what Anthony was saying, I think that would have been an opportunity to basically consider these as separate units, right? And then seeing how a certain interaction with the site, either at the level of carving, like going under, but also since you have many horizontal cuts and openings, relating to certain views out, right? Like what you see, what you perceive, whether it's the river or something else, to kind of orchestrate very, very carefully the position of each of these units in such a way that they interact with the site in a powerful way, while at the same time are threaded together in a way that actually also is meaningful for the whole, right? And I think this second step is not there, right? The only step that's there, it's basically the awareness of having all the rooms together in one piece. And I think maybe, further to that, at some point in your presentation, you said that this was a highly ambiguous object, right? Highly ambiguous piece of architecture. But I think actually it's the opposite, right? I mean, it's very specific in exactly the way in which you conceive of every room, the way the openings are cut out and everything that requires a high degree of specificity. And this is no criticism, really. I mean, this is maybe to make the point that in order to achieve a certain sense of ambiguity, you actually have to be extremely specific with the architecture for that to happen, right? So in a way, there has to be this tension between ambiguity and specificity for something like this to happen, right? But basically everything about the shot of the model where you said this was a highly ambiguous piece was about, in a way, the opposite, right? Was about you having been extremely careful in designing the curvature, what happened in every room, the tilts, the incline, everything was actually very, very deliberate, as a matter of fact, right? So just maybe give it a thought. But beautiful project.
This project has gotten me. I love hearing these comments. I sort of wasn't sure what to think until I started listening to all of you speaking, and then something started to gel for me, and I realized that that these are the rocks from Rhinebeck, and they should be the rocks from the river. So the next step could be, because I really like this project, and I think what you're finding the sublime sort of inspired by the rocks. The rocks are sort of are encouraging you. You're somehow ennobling the rocks. You're finding ways to get us to think about rocks and to realize these wonderful forms. You're finding something sublime in them and helping us to see something sublime in them by putting them in an architectural space, whatever that may be. But it would be really interesting how these rooms would change and how the forms would change if you now went to the site and picked 7 rocks from there. I think it could be quite different. And it might, just a thought, if you have more time to go there and find them, it might be that you're finding stones from there. Maybe they're very big, I don't know. And creating architecture around them that is responding to the place in some very profound way, and the sublimity from there.
Hi, Shrey. I think your midterm was really, really strong, and some of the other students whose midterm weren't so strong made a lot of progress into developing the project. And I think maybe I agree with Jose that the qualities of the room need to be translated to the whole project somehow. So I would encourage you to do that. I don't know whether it's how you like the models, or I don't know. I think the rooms and the concept are very, very strong, and you had that at the midterm, and I would encourage you to just continue the qualities of those again into the site project. I don't know how quite else to put it, but I think I'm feeling similar to Jose on this.
Shrey, if you go back to the elevation very quickly, the sketch that you had, this drawing, I think, is very telling of the whole project, in a way of discovering the interiors and the power of those interiors, and then the question of how to arrange them. And in a way, the arrangement, and you've tried many configurations, so this one for me is the most successful one, whether they are in a box or in a circle or in a line. I think what's very interesting for me here, I love this very first top drawing and the subsequent ones, how these slices give us maybe a glimpse of what's through, maybe what's inside, what comes through, almost like a shadow theater. It's still ambiguous what that surface is, how translucent it is. It could be almost 6 mystery boxes, right? You don't know quite which one you will enter. There is a little bit of a chance of how randomly they can be arranged, and what you experience entering each one, not knowing what you will encounter next. So I think that this project plays on that idea of random encounter, and with these glimpses through, you can relate to the exterior, yet not in kind of slices of reality. That's where I think the ambiguity lies of not quite revealing or expecting what's in there, but creating this theater of light and shadow, which is very, very different from the experience of the interior.
No, that's a great point. I agree. It was like, so I think like several times you had brought up Stephen's Exoven house as an example of like you work from the inside and then the outside is just kind of what's left from the cuts and the slices and the intersections of surface and space. And so I think that I was left with these boxes. And then when I arranged them, I realized just kind of by accident that these little cracks or these little slices of light that occur between them are also kind of an interesting space. And so that's what led to this drawing. Like it's kind of an unrolled representation, I guess, of that experience. And you're right, they could become curved. They could be a circle, they could just be flattened into a straight line in acceptance of a certain site condition. But that, again, I guess like this drawing sort of does represent the ambiguity.
In a way, we went full circle from a project that dealt with rocks to a very, very different approach toward nature and geological time. Perhaps it would be good to take just a few moments for overall comments and thoughts about what each resident brought into the discussion.
I made a sketch. Can I show up my sketch?
Yes.
So there's Abdullah. You see Abdullah. That's my drawing of Abdullah. There's Alex. When I think about all of these projects, they all have successfully asked the question of the sublime. And that's, to me, was really a tremendous achievement in such a short amount of time. And, I think that what's really interesting also is that my argument in the beginning was you've got a beautiful site. You have a very specificity of the site. You need an idea that drives the design, and the idea has to question the sublime. And I think that Abdullah's color as something which is dissolving gets its meaning when he anchors it in circadian rhythms and the sun patterns. I just thought that was a brilliant scientific clarification. And I think that Alex's stone, the sunstone, this rough to smooth could be just something explored more. And I was shocked with Miranda's progress, how she came, to that. And I think Nathaniel Kahn's description of what she did was better than anything that I could do. But the project that I would choose to build now, if this was a competition and I was going to say, okay, we're going to build this, would be Claire's, because I love the site plan, and like everybody said, it's like the beginning of a thesis. It needs a lot of work, but and what Nathaniel said, it's a work that's different every time you go there. I think it's a fantastic group. Five great projects. We have to do a little video or some kind of a record of this. That's my final remarks. Thank you, everybody.
I mean, Irene, I came in pretty early to give feedback, and I was really astounded at the quality that the students had achieved early on. So I think that you all have a lot of, maybe it's developed over the years, but inherent talent to begin with, and insight. And I'm really impressed by how some of you have transformed the project since the midterm and responded so well to criticism. And I am really excited to see what you're going to do in the future. But yeah, it was such a high standard from the beginning. It's really impressive.
I think just a great morning and afternoon of work. Thank you so much for the invitation to not only come to the final and the midterm, but to also be a part of the very difficult selection process of the participants. I mean, this is a little bit maybe behind the scenes, but it's a really competitive process, as you all know, and so many talented and wonderful candidates. So what I think is very important is the chemistry of the participants. And I feel as if the 5 projects work so well together. I mean, it's just, if I, in my head, I have one image from each project just sitting next to the other. And it's amazing. And kudos to the writing of the problem. It's an incredibly difficult project to engage. The sublime, needless to say, is one of the most overbearing but also elusive things that you could ever engage as an artist, architect, writer. And I think each one of you got in there with a very authentic and open-minded framework, and really you produce something with extreme poetic precision and power, and it's just very inspiring. So I'm so happy I got to see the final today. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, as Anthony's saying, centuries behind, the sublime, right? Philosophical reflection on the sublime. I mean, it's such a difficult concept, and one thing I did learn today was that when it comes to the sublime, it's usually this vast scale that escapes human understanding, or this sense of terror or fear that tends to be highlighted. I think what cut across all 5 projects today was also a certain notion of dissolution or undecidability, which I perhaps had not encountered before that much in terms of the sublime. So to me, that was really interesting to kind of look at that notion, through a different lens, and to do so through these extremely poetic projects, as Anthony said. So congratulations, everyone. And it was, as always, a really great discussion to be a part of. And thank you for having invited me, as always.
Thank you, Jose.
Yes, thank
Please
you.
stay in contact from Madrid.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. I'm going to New York again in November, so maybe we can see each other then.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you all for showing me these wonderful projects today. Each one of them has so much to think about, and has left me with lots to think about in my own profession. I'm very grateful to all of you for making us really think about what the sublime is. And I'm sort of left with this thought, or this question, that is the sublime something that's actually out there, or is it only in us? And I don't know the answer. But each one of your projects made me engage with that sort of really wonderful fundamental question. That's almost, I feel like I'm inside this kind of sacred tent here, where we can ask these questions because we're all involved in the arts. We get to ask questions that are almost embarrassing. They're almost embarrassing to talk about, like in public or something like that. Like you say, well, I'm after the sublime. You sound so pretentious and arrogant to say something like that. But of course we are after that in some way, though we'd rather have someone else say it about our work than try to, if we say it about ourselves, we're really in trouble. But the idea of pursuing that seems so good and so right and so easy to be cynical about or something, but it really is what we're after. And right. One asks at the end of the day, is this something that's out there in nature, or is it within us? I don't know the answer, but each one of you engaged in that question in some way. You made me think, is it me that's seeing it, or is it actually there? Am I making it up, or is it actually there? So each one of your projects were wonderful in their own way. And I wish I could have been here in the middle to see how they progressed, because they're all wonderful. I hope you'll invite me back to participate again. I'm learning so much. My day is very full. I feel filled with sublime today from all of you. Thank you.
Nathaniel, thank you so much. When I gave the talk at the beginning, trying to describe what it is we were aiming at, I showed many different views of the Salk Institute and that strip of water and how it meets the horizon. Your father's, I think, maybe most sublime project, but all of the work of Lou, for me, has this dimension of the sublime. And I think part of it also is the way that he could speak about it, you know, and people somehow got convinced. And I think maybe partially it is in us. It's not just, it's like, you know, I have these two kids and I say, yo, look at that sun. Look at the reflection of that sun on the treetops there. It's just at the end of the day. And she looks up and she sees it. And it's a little bit me telling her to look at it. In other words, I think that the questions of the sublime, I think you really hit it. It's partly in us. It's partly the sense of wonder, right? And it doesn't have to be architecture. It can be everything, you know?
Right. And I just, you know, I everything you said is true. And I agree to that space in the Salk Institute is sublime. But I also want to say that I think it's sort of easy, or maybe not easy, but we tend to sort of think that someone has this great gift to create the sublime. You know, it was so hard. It was so hard to get there, and it could easily have gone the wrong way, and in other places it did go the wrong way. So it's not what we were seeing today. Also, is this enormous? One has to be engaged in the pursuit of it. You never really get there.
Right.
It's not as if you kind of, you know, we all are really the same, and you know, in the sense that we're pursuing something that can never really be attained, and if we touch on it, that's enough. You know.
Right.
So I agree about the Salk Institute, but I do want to say one thing about it. That was a hell of a site. You can't beat that site. So almost
I know,
anything
but it was almost ruined by Larry Halpern's trees.
That's right.
And Barragan showed up. Lou Kahn said, as soon as I saw Lawrence Halpern with his magic markers smelling of benzene, I knew I needed Barragan. And Barragan showed up and said there should be no trees.
Right.
This should be a plaza. And that's how this, you're right, it was very hard. In fact, the building was under construction. So it could have gone the wrong way easily. It could have gone
very easily. And you've named the other really key thing here, which is we need these forums where we get together and share our ideas in an environment of there's no right and wrong. We're all seeking something that none of us has ever really achieved.
Right.
And do it together. Yes, of course, you know, there's an architect of something or a painter or, you know, and you pursue these things on your own. But I bet you even Goya let somebody in the room, you know, he couldn't hear. So I don't know how they communicate in some wonderful way, but I'm sure every artist craves this kind of conversation, as my father had with Barragan. Without Barragan, the thing would not have been great.
That's true.
So it's enormously important to have these kinds of forums that you've created to share our ideas in a safe place where we can help each other to search for the sublime.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Beautiful afternoon. And Irina, you're going to tell the students about, they're going to come here and visit our little archive. And
yes, we can't wait to welcome you in person. Yes.
All right. Okay, I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you. Deeply thank you, all the critics. Wonderful remarks. Great day. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.